The sprawling space station thrummed with the constant hum of machinery and the multilingual chatter of beings from every corner of the galaxy. Humans, aliens, and creatures whose origins remained shrouded in mystery all coexisted within its metallic walls, which shimmered under the glow of artificial lights. This towering structure served as a hub for trade, diplomacy, and occasionally, conflict. Among this diverse population, one figure commanded attention, a towering alien warrior woman named Lyra. She dwarfed even the tallest humans, her pale azure skin and softly luminous eyes setting her apart from the rest. Lyra's strength was legendary, whispered about in hushed tones. No one dared challenge her, particularly given the reputation of her people, the Zarians, known for their formidable power, agility, and keen intellect. Yet, Lyra was an anomaly among her own kind. Her unusual height and striking appearance set her apart, leading many to shun her. Humans whispered behind their hands, while other species simply avoided her. She remained an enigma, a figure of both awe and apprehension. Lyra seemed indifferent to the whispers and stares, carrying herself with an unwavering confidence that belied any sense of isolation. She knew she didn't belong, but she took pride in her uniqueness. Yet, even the strongest can experience loneliness. Then there was Kai, a human man of ordinary stature and abilities. He possessed a deep fascination with alien cultures and the worlds beyond his own. What Kai lacked in physical prowess, he made up for in courage. As a member of the station's security team, he had confronted numerous perilous situations, but upon seeing Lyra, he felt a profound connection. Perhaps it was her air of solitude, or the way she carried herself, as if waiting for someone to truly see her. Whatever the reason, Kai felt compelled to approach her. He had heard the cautionary tales, of course. Humans were deemed too frail to interact with the Zarians, and the idea of forming a close relationship was considered laughable. But Kai disregarded these warnings. He cared little for societal expectations. One afternoon, he found Lyra standing by the observation deck window, gazing out at the star-dusted expanse. Her hands rested on the glass, as if reaching for something beyond her grasp. After a moment of hesitation, Kai approached, his boots clicking softly against the floor. He could feel the curious stares of other station inhabitants. Some had even wagered on how quickly he would retreat. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady despite a tremor of nerves. Lyra turned slowly, her luminous eyes fixing on him. For a heartbeat, Kai wondered if she would dismiss him, but then she offered a slight nod. "Hello," she replied, her voice deep and resonant. "You are a courageous human. Most of your kind keep their distance." Kai chuckled nervously. "I wouldn't say courageous, more curious." He offered a tentative smile, hoping to convey his lack of fear. Lyra arched an eyebrow. "Curious? About what?" "About you," Kai admitted, his voice softening. "I've never encountered anyone quite like you." Lyra studied him, her expression inscrutable, yet Kai detected a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps surprise, or maybe a glimmer of hope. "You don't belong with your own kind," she observed, her tone questioning. "Why would you choose to interact with me?" Kai inhaled deeply, choosing honesty. "I don't believe being different is a reason to be isolated. I know others have mistreated you, but I sense a strength in you that they fail to recognize." Lyra blinked, taken aback. "You perceive strength in me?" She almost scoffed. "Most see only power, not strength." "Power isn't everything," Kai countered. "Strength is about more than outward appearances. It's about character and convictions." For the first time, Lyra truly seemed to see him, her gaze thoughtful as she considered his words. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice softer. "Perhaps you are right, human." Kai smiled. He had taken the first step, and perhaps it was enough to begin bridging the gap between them. He couldn't predict the future, but he was determined not to leave Lyra alone. The stars outside twinkled, and for the first time in a long while, Lyra felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in what seemed like forever, hope. The sprawling station pulsed with the rhythmic thrum of its machinery, a symphony of sounds overlaid with the diverse languages of beings from across the cosmos. Within its gleaming metallic walls, illuminated by the soft glow of artificial suns, humans, aliens, and entities of unknown origin coexisted, a testament to the station's purpose as a nexus of trade, diplomacy, and, at times, conflict. Amidst this diverse throng, one figure drew all eyes, a towering alien warrior named Ilara. Dwarfing even the tallest humans, her pale cerulean skin and softly radiant eyes distinguished her from the rest. Ilara's power was the stuff of legend, spoken of in hushed whispers. None dared to cross her, especially given the formidable reputation of her people, the Xantari, renowned for their strength, speed, and sharp minds. Yet, Ilara was unique even amongst her own kind. Her unusual height and striking features set her apart, causing many to shun her. Humans murmured behind their hands, while other species simply kept their distance. She was an enigma, a source of both fascination and unease. Ilara appeared unfazed by the whispers and stares, moving with a steadfast confidence that masked any sense of solitude. She accepted that she was different and embraced her individuality. Still, even the most resilient can experience moments of isolation. Then there was Kale, a human man of ordinary height and skills. He possessed an unending fascination for alien cultures and the worlds beyond his own. What Kale lacked in physical strength, he made up for in bravery. A member of the station's security force, he had faced countless dangerous situations, but upon seeing Ilara, he felt an inexplicable connection. Perhaps it was her aura of loneliness, or the way she carried herself, as if searching for someone who truly understood her. Whatever the reason, Kale felt compelled to reach out. Of course, he had heard the warnings. Humans were considered too fragile for interactions with the Xantari, and the notion of forming a close bond was considered preposterous. But Kale dismissed these cautions. He cared little for societal norms. One afternoon, he found Ilara standing by the panoramic viewport, gazing at the star-dusted canvas of space. Her hands rested on the glass, as if yearning for something just beyond her grasp. After a brief hesitation, Kale approached, his boots clicking softly against the metallic floor. He could feel the curious gazes of the other station inhabitants. Some had even placed wagers on how quickly he would retreat. "Ilara," he said, his voice steady despite a tremor of nervousness. Ilara turned slowly, her luminous eyes focusing on him. For a heartbeat, Kale wondered if she would dismiss him, but then she offered a slight nod. "Greetings," she replied, her voice deep and resonant. "You are a bold human. Most of your kind maintain their distance." Kale chuckled nervously. "I wouldn't say bold, more inquisitive." He offered a tentative smile, hoping to convey his peaceful intentions. Ilara arched an eyebrow. "Inquisitive? About what?" "About you," Kale admitted, his voice softening. "I've never encountered anyone quite like you." Ilara studied him, her expression inscrutable, but Kale detected a flicker of something in her eyes, perhaps surprise, or maybe a hint of interest. "You are an outsider amongst your own kind," she observed, her tone questioning. "Why would you choose to interact with me?" Kale inhaled deeply, choosing honesty. "I don't believe being different is a reason to be alone. I sense a great spirit in you that others fail to recognize. I know they have not always been kind." Ilara blinked, taken aback. "You perceive strength in me?" She almost scoffed. "Most see only power, not inner resilience." "Power is not everything," Kale countered. "Inner resilience is about more than appearances. It's about character and conviction." For the first time, Ilara truly seemed to see him, her gaze thoughtful as she considered his words. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice softer. "Perhaps you are correct, human." Kale smiled. He had made a connection, and perhaps it was enough to begin bridging the gap between them. He couldn't predict the future, but he was determined to not leave Ilara isolated. The stars outside shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, Ilara felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in what seemed like eons, a spark of hope. The vastness of space reflected in her eyes, now tinged with something other than loneliness, something that hinted at a new beginning. The following days were a strange mix of emotions for Kale. He couldn't shake the image of Ilara from his mind, her towering presence and quiet strength leaving a lasting impression. His curiosity had always been a driving force, but this was more than just a fascination with the unknown. He felt a pull towards her, a desire to understand the loneliness he sensed beneath her confident exterior. He knew the prevailing sentiment on the station. Humans were generally regarded as fragile, weak compared to the other species, especially the physically imposing Xantari. They were often dismissed, seen as little more than laborious or expendable security personnel. Kale had witnessed the casual disdain, the open mockery from Xantari officers who scoffed at the idea of a human being a true partner. It stung, this constant reminder of his perceived inferiority. And yet, Ilara was different. Despite her formidable stature and the obvious power she possessed, she carried an air of melancholy, a sense of isolation that resonated with Kale. Perhaps that's what drew him to her, this shared experience of being an outsider. One afternoon in the mess hall, Kale overheard a group of Xantari soldiers mocking him, their laughter echoing around him. "Did you hear?" one sneered. "That human, Kale, actually thinks he has a chance with Ilara. Seriously, what does he have to offer her? He's just a weakling." The words twisted inside him, reinforcing the pervasive view of humans as insignificant. He tried to ignore them, but the sting remained. He knew he wasn't weak. He had faced danger, survived harrowing situations that would have broken many others. But to them, he was just a human, and that was enough to dismiss him. The encounter fueled a burning resolve within Kale. He would prove them wrong. He would show them that humans were capable of more than they assumed. That evening, he pushed himself harder than ever in the training room, each punch, each kick driven by a desire to defy their expectations. He wasn't training for himself, not really. He was training for Ilara, to show her that he wasn't just a human, but someone who could stand beside her, someone worthy of her respect. A few days later, he encountered Ilara in the hallway. "You are not afraid of me," she observed, her luminous eyes searching his. Kale shook his head. "Why would I be?" Ilara studied him intently. "You humans think you are strong, but you are fragile. You cannot fight like my people." Kale held her gaze. "You're right. I can't fight like a Xantari. But that doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I fight differently." Ilara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And how is that?" Kale offered a small, determined smile. "You'll see." He knew his words were bold, perhaps even reckless. But he couldn't back down now. He had to show her, show everyone, that humans were capable of more than they imagined. He had to show Ilara that he saw her, not just as a powerful warrior, but as someone who deserved to be seen, to be understood. He had to show her, and himself, that he wasn't afraid to stand beside her, no matter the cost. The next few weeks were a crucible, forging Kale and Ilara's bond through shared trials and arduous training. Ilara pushed Kale relentlessly, testing his physical limits, his mental fortitude, and his emotional resilience. He trained harder than he ever had, his muscles screaming in protest, his mind weary, yet he persevered. He understood that this was the only path to proving his worth. The first true test was a sparring match in the station's combat arena. Ilara's eyes glinted with a cool intensity as she assessed Kale. "This is where I will see your strength, human," she declared, her voice ringing with challenge. "Show me what you are made of." Kale met her gaze, a flicker of apprehension in his eyes, but he stood his ground. He knew he couldn't defeat her, the disparity in their physical abilities was too vast. But he wasn't fighting to win. He was fighting to endure, to demonstrate that he possessed the tenacity to withstand her power and remain standing. The fight began, a whirlwind of motion and force. Ilara moved with a speed and power that was breathtaking, knocking Kale to the floor with effortless ease. Each blow resonated through his body, a jarring reminder of her strength. But Kale refused to stay down. He pushed himself up, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip, his gaze fixed on Ilara. "You're tougher than I thought," Ilara admitted, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You don't give up easily." "But toughness isn't enough," she added. You must be smarter. Kale nodded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He knew she was right. He wasn't going to win through brute force, he needed to adapt, to learn. Every strike, every block, every near miss was a lesson, a chance to understand her fighting style and find a way to survive. As the days turned into weeks, Kale faced a series of increasingly difficult challenges. Obstacle courses tested his agility, endurance, and quick thinking. He had to learn to work with Ilara, to anticipate her movements, to function as a team even when facing overwhelming odds. At first, their coordination was clumsy, their efforts disjointed. But slowly, a silent understanding began to develop between them. Ilara taught him how to be faster, more precise, how to anticipate her next move. Yet, the whispers and stares continued. The alien soldiers still regarded him with disdain, muttering about his human frailty, his inevitable failure. He's just a human, they sneered. He'll never be able to keep up with her. But Kale refused to let their doubts penetrate his resolve. He focused on Ilara, on proving himself to her, on earning her respect. One evening, after a particularly grueling training session, Kale collapsed onto the floor, his body bruised and aching. Ilara approached, her towering form casting a long shadow over him. "You've done well today," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "You are showing me that you are stronger than I thought." Kale looked up at her, a small smile touching his lips. "I'm not done yet," he replied. "I still have a long way to go." Ilara nodded, a flicker of a smile gracing her own lips. "That is the right attitude, human. We have a long road ahead, but I am beginning to see that you have the potential to be strong, to stand beside me." For the first time, Kale felt a surge of true accomplishment. It wasn't about the physical training, the bruises, the exhaustion. It was about the trust that was slowly blossoming between them, a fragile flower in the harsh environment of the space station. He knew he hadn't fully earned Ilara's approval, but he was on his way, slowly but surely proving that he was more than just a fragile human. He was someone who deserved to stand by her side. The weeks that followed Kale's declaration were a strange intermingling of intense training and quiet moments of understanding. Ilara continued to push him, honing his skills, refining his reflexes, and shaping him into a warrior who could complement her own formidable abilities. He learned to anticipate her movements, to react instinctively, to use his smaller size and quicker reflexes to his advantage. The sparring matches became less about enduring and more about strategy, about finding the openings, exploiting weaknesses, and working together as a cohesive unit. The whispers and stares from the other station inhabitants gradually faded, replaced by a grudging respect as they witnessed the human who refused to break, who continued to rise every time he was knocked down. Kale was no longer just a human, he was Ilara's partner, and that carried weight, even amongst the Xantari. One evening, after a particularly intense training session, Kale found Ilara standing by the panoramic viewport, gazing out at the swirling nebulae painted across the vast canvas of space. He approached quietly, standing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured, his voice soft. Ilara nodded, her luminous eyes reflecting the celestial lights. "It reminds me of home," she said, a hint of melancholy in her voice. "A place I haven't seen in a long time." Kale placed a hand gently on her arm, a gesture of comfort and understanding. "I know it's not the same," he said, "but maybe, someday, we can go there together." Ilara turned to him, her gaze searching his. "Do you mean that, Kale?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kale met her gaze, his own eyes filled with sincerity. "I do," he replied, his voice firm. "I would go anywhere with you." He hesitated for a moment, then added, "I want to share my world with you too. Show you where I come from." A flicker of a smile touched Ilara's lips. "Perhaps," she said softly. "Perhaps, one day." The next morning, a summons arrived, interrupting their fragile peace. A Xantari officer, his face grim, delivered the news: a remote outpost on the edge of the galaxy had gone silent. Initial reports suggested a hostile takeover by a previously unknown alien faction. The situation was critical. The outpost served as a vital communication relay, and its loss could cripple a significant portion of the station's network. A team was needed to investigate, and the officer, his gaze unwavering, named Kale and Elara as the leaders of the mission. The mission was fraught with peril. The journey to the outpost was long and arduous, the ship navigating treacherous asteroid fields and dodging unexpected spatial anomalies. The outpost itself was eerily silent, the air thick with tension. Kale and Elara, working together seamlessly, cleared each section, their movements a symphony of coordinated action. They encountered automated security systems, deactivated by a sophisticated virus, and remnants of a fierce struggle, hinting at the ferocity of the unknown attackers. Finally, they reached the central control room, where they discovered the source of the silence, a group of insectoid aliens, their bodies shimmering with a bioluminescent glow, huddled around a complex console, their clicking mandibles a cacophony of alien communication. The ensuing battle was swift and brutal. The insectoids, though smaller than Kale and Elara, were surprisingly strong and agile, their movements unpredictable. Kale, using his quick thinking and adaptability, managed to disable their communication systems, disrupting their coordinated attacks. Elara, with her superior strength and unwavering resolve, pressed the advantage, driving the insectoids back, forcing them to retreat deeper into the outpost. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the last insectoid fell, and silence descended upon the control room once more. Exhausted but victorious, Kale and Elara stood amidst the wreckage, their bodies bruised and aching. They had succeeded, but the victory felt bittersweet. The outpost was severely damaged, the communication systems compromised. It would take time, and considerable effort, to restore it to full functionality. As they prepared to return to the station, Elara turned to Kale, her gaze thoughtful. "You fought well, Kale," she said, her voice soft. "You have proven yourself a true warrior." Kale met her gaze, his own eyes filled with a mixture of pride and affection. "We did it together, Elara," he replied. "We are stronger together." Elara nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "Indeed," she murmured. "Together." The journey back to the station was quiet, a shared silence filled with unspoken understanding. As they approached the docking bay, Kale reached for Elara's hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. She didn't pull away, her hand remaining clasped in his, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual respect. They had faced the unknown together, and in doing so, had discovered something far more profound than victory, a connection that transcended species, a love that defied all expectations. As they stepped off the ship, hand in hand, they knew that their journey had just begun. The vast expanse of the galaxy stretched before them, a canvas of infinite possibilities, and they were ready to face it, together.